a moment, it was a flash of anger, of realization of what we had gotten ourselves into.
For a moment it was a flash of anger, a sudden realization of what they had gotten themselves into. Few bands have left a mark on rock history quite like Heart. Their powerful vocals, soaring guitars, and unforgettable anthems defined an era. But behind the music, a far more complicated story was unfolding. Ann and Nancy Wilson were not just bandmates, they were sisters. On stage their chemistry felt effortless, almost magical, but away from the spotlight tensions quietly built for decades. From breaking barriers in a male-dominated industry to navigating creative struggles and personal differences, their journey was anything but simple. Then in 2016, a shocking family conflict changed everything, creating a divide that may never fully heal. Tonight we unravel the story of Heart, the rise, the fractures, and the uncertain future of one of rock's most iconic duos, and ask the question fans still wonder about today: is there any path left toward reconciliation, or was that truly the final note? Long before they became rock legends, Ann and Nancy Wilson were simply two sisters growing up in a life defined by constant change. Their father was a Marine Corps officer, which meant frequent moves from California to Taiwan, from Panama to Seattle. For many children this kind of instability would be overwhelming, but for the Wilson sisters there was one constant that followed them everywhere: music. Their home was always filled with sound. Their father, a passionate music lover, played everything from grand opera to big band jazz, while their mother, a talented pianist and singer, encouraged the girls to explore their own musical instincts. Sundays were often filled with dramatic classical pieces, while weekday evenings echoed with the soul of Ray Charles and the raw energy of early rock and roll. This wide exposure shaped Ann and Nancy's musical identity long before they ever stepped onto a stage. While music brought joy, Ann struggled deeply with insecurity. She was painfully shy and often felt like an outsider due to the family's constant relocations. Speaking in everyday situations was difficult for her, but singing was different. When she sang, her voice flowed freely. Music became her confidence, her refuge, and her sense of belonging. Nancy found her own voice through the guitar. Inspired by folk artists and the harmonic brilliance of the Beatles, she became determined to master the instrument. While other kids were outside playing, Nancy spent hours practicing chords and finger-picking patterns, quietly building the foundation of a style that would one day become instantly recognizable. By the early 1970s, Ann had taken her first major step into the music scene, joining a local Seattle band. That group soon evolved into Heart, and when Nancy joined a few years later, everything clicked. Ann's commanding vocals paired perfectly with Nancy's intricate guitar work, creating a sound that blended hard rock power with folk-inspired storytelling. It was bold, emotional, and unlike anything else at the time. Determined to chase bigger opportunities, the band relocated to Vancouver, Canada, where they recorded their debut album Dreamboat Annie in 1975. Songs like Magic Man and Crazy on You introduced the world to Heart's unique identity, and the response was explosive. At a time when female-led rock bands were rare, Heart shattered expectations. Ann and Nancy weren't just performers, they were writers, musicians, and leaders. They proved they could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone in rock. As their success grew, so did the challenges. The industry often tried to shape them into something more marketable, more conventional, but the Wilson sisters refused to compromise their identity. Their defiance reached its peak with the release of Barracuda, a fierce anthem born from frustration and determination. It became a statement of independence, a declaration that Heart would control their own story. Through the late 70s and into the 80s, hit after hit followed. As music trends shifted, Heart adapted without losing their essence. Their self-titled album and later releases introduced a more polished sound that dominated radio and filled arenas around the world. By the late 80s, Heart was one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. But behind the success, the pressures of constant touring, creative expectations, and personal exhaustion began to take their toll. The sisters, once inseparable, slowly started drifting apart. As the 90s arrived, the music industry changed dramatically. New sounds took over, and Heart found themselves at a crossroads. Album sales declined, and the relentless pace became harder to sustain. Eventually, and Nancy stepped away to explore separate creative paths and focused on solo work, diving deeper into blues and folk influences, while Nancy found a new outlet in film scoring and production. Though Hart eventually reunited for tours in the early 2000s, the underlying tensions never fully disappeared. Then came 2016, the moment that changed everything. During a tour stop in Washington, a serious family dispute occurred involving people close to the band. What should have been a routine night quickly turned into a situation that deeply affected both sisters. For Nancy, the incident crossed a line that could not be ignored. For Anne, the situation was viewed through a different lens. Their opposing responses created a divide that went far beyond music. From that point forward, their relationship fractured completely. The remainder of the tour continued, but everything had changed. They traveled separately, communicated through intermediaries, and kept personal distance. On stage they remained professional, delivering powerful performances, but fans sensed the tension. When the tour ended, it became clear that Hart as it once existed was gone. In the years that followed, Anne and Nancy moved forward independently and embraced creative freedom through solo projects, releasing deeply personal music that reflected who she was without the weight of expectations. Nancy, meanwhile, focused on keeping Hart's legacy alive, performing the band's classic songs with a new lineup and honoring the music that meant so much to fans. In 2019, Hart reunited for the Love Alive tour, offering hope that the sisters had found common ground. But behind the scenes, everything remained carefully separated. It was a professional reunion, not a personal one. Today, both Anne and Nancy continue to thrive creatively, each honoring Hart's legacy in their own way. Anne's solo work reflects freedom and reinvention, while Nancy remains dedicated to preserving the spirit of the band that changed rock history. Yet the question remains unanswered. Will time heal the wounds that run so deep, or has the chapter of Hart truly closed forever? What is undeniable is the legacy they created together. Hart broke barriers, redefined rock, and inspired generations of artists. Their music still resonates, still empowers, and still reminds us of what happens when talent, determination, and passion collide. Whether united again or forever apart, Anne and Nancy Wilson have already secured their place in music history. And now the question is left to the fans. Do you believe time can bring them back together, or was that final note already played? Let us know what you think, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into rock history, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories about the legends who shaped music forever. As the years moved forward, the story of Hart became something larger than chart positions or sold-out arenas. It became a story about endurance, identity, and the complicated reality of creating something timeless with someone who shares your blood. For Anne and Nancy Wilson, music was never just a career. It was the language they learned before adulthood, the place where they felt strongest, and the bond that once made them feel unbreakable. Even after distance set in, that shared history never disappeared. Every song they wrote together carried echoes of childhood bedrooms filled with guitars and voices, of long drives between duty stations, of dreams formed long before fame ever entered the picture. Hart's influence continued to grow even during periods of silence. Younger artists spoke openly about how the Wilson sisters changed what was possible. They proved that women could lead rock bands without sacrificing power, musicianship, or creative control. They showed that vulnerability and strength could exist in the same song, sometimes even in the same note. Long after trends shifted and radio formats changed, Hart's music remained a reference point, a blueprint for authenticity in an industry that often rewarded conformity. For Anne, stepping away from Hart meant rediscovering herself outside the shadow of expectation. For decades, every creative choice she made had been filtered through the identity of the band. Once that pressure lifted, she allowed herself to follow instinct rather than legacy. Her later work carried a sense of reflection, not nostalgia, but wisdom earned through experience. Her voice, still powerful, took on new textures shaped by time, emotion, and personal truth. Listeners didn't just hear a singer revisiting her past, they heard an artist continuing her evolution. Nancy's path reflected a different relationship with history. Where Anne sought distance from the weight of the past, Nancy leaned into it, seeing Hart's catalog as something living rather than finished. For her, keeping the music alive wasn't about reliving old glory, it was about honoring the connection those songs still had with people. Night after night, fans filled venues not just to hear familiar melodies, but to reconnect with moments in their own lives. First loves, road trips, heartbreaks, victories, all carried inside songs written decades earlier. Nancy understood that power and embraced the responsibility that came with it. Yet even as both sisters found fulfillment on their own terms, the absence of their shared presence remained noticeable. Hart without both Wilson sisters felt incomplete, not because the music lacked quality, but because the emotional center had shifted. Their harmonies were more than technical perfection, they were expressions of shared history, shaped by years of singing together before fame, before contracts, before expectations. That kind of connection cannot be replicated, no matter how skilled the supporting musicians. Fans noticed the difference, not as a criticism, but as a quiet acknowledgement of what once was. Conversations online and in fan communities often drifted toward the same question. Could there ever be a true reunion, not just a tour, but a genuine reconnection? Some believed time would soften everything, that distance might eventually create space for understanding. Others felt the divide was too deeply rooted, shaped by more than just professional disagreements, by choices that touched family at its core. The truth is that reconciliation between siblings is rarely simple, especially when the relationship has been lived so publicly. And Nancy didn't just share memories, they shared a brand, a legacy, and the expectations of millions. Every move they made was scrutinized, every comment analyzed. Silence itself became a statement. In that environment, healing doesn't happen easily. It requires vulnerability without an audience, honesty without headlines, and patience without guarantees. What made their story resonate so deeply was its relatability. Stripped of fame and accolades, it was still a story many recognized. Two people who loved each other, built something extraordinary together, and then grew in different directions. It was about how shared dreams can sometimes become shared burdens, and how success can complicate relationships just as easily as it can strengthen them. Hart's music captured those contradictions long before the public ever saw them play out in real life. Songs like These Dreams, Alone, Crazy on You, and Barracuda continued to take on new meanings as years passed. What once felt like expressions of youth now sounded like reflections on resilience. Lyrics written in moments of passion or defiance became mirrors for listeners navigating their own changes. That timeless quality was the mark of truly great songwriting, and it ensured that Hart's relevance never faded, even as the band itself evolved. As rock history continued to be rewritten by new generations, Hart's place within it remained secure. They weren't remembered as a novelty or a product of a specific era, but as innovators who expanded the boundaries of what rock could look and sound like. Music critics often placed him among the greatest vocalists of all time, while Nancy's guitar work earned recognition for its blend of precision, emotion, and restraint. Together, they represented balance, power paired with sensitivity, intensity softened by melody. Behind the accolades, however, the human story remained unresolved. Interviews over the years offered glimpses, but never the full picture. Both sisters spoke carefully, choosing words that revealed little while protecting what remained private. That restraint suggested not indifference, but complexity. Some wounds don't fade because they are ignored, and some bonds don't break because they are strained. Sometimes they simply change shape. Occasionally, moments sparked renewed speculation. A shared stage appearance, a brief comment in an interview, a nostalgic post. Each time, fans leaned in, hoping for signs of something more. But hope, like music, exists best when it is allowed to breathe, not forced into conclusions. And Nancy seemed aware of that, choosing to let their actions speak quietly rather than loudly. What remains undeniable is that their story reshaped the landscape of rock music. Without Hart, countless artists might never have believed there was space for them. Without and Nancy's refusal to be reduced or reshaped, the industry itself may have moved more slowly toward inclusion and respect. Their impact extended beyond sound into culture, challenging assumptions about who could lead, who could write, and who could command a stage. As time continues forward, the question of reunion may eventually lose urgency. Not because it doesn't matter, but because the music already exists, complete and enduring. Heart doesn't need a final chapter to validate its significance. It already changed lives, opened doors, and created moments that will never disappear. Whether Anne and Nancy ever fully reconnect or continue along parallel paths, their shared creation stands as proof of what they accomplished together. Still, the human desire for closure lingers. Fans don't just want another tour, they want peace. They want to believe that the sisters who once stood side by side, voices intertwined, can one day look at each other not through conflict or distance, but through memory and understanding. Whether that moment ever comes remains unknown, and perhaps it doesn't need to be decided yet. What matters is that Heart's music continues to speak. It speaks to courage, to independence, to vulnerability, and to the strength found in authenticity. It speaks to the power of collaboration and the cost that sometimes comes with it. And it reminds us that even when harmony fades, the echoes remain. In the end, Anne and Nancy Wilson's story is not just about separation, it is about creation. About two sisters who turned shared experiences into sound, who transformed personal struggles into anthems, and who left behind a body of work that continues to inspire long after the spotlight has shifted. Their journey reminds us that legacies are not defined by how they end, but by what they leave behind. So as listeners return to Heart's songs, whether through vinyl, streaming, or live performance, they are not just hearing music from another time. They are hearing the sound of ambition, resilience, and connection. They are hearing the voices of two sisters who, together, changed rock forever. And whether reunited or forever separate, that truth will never fade.